Hello and welcome to another episode of the F1 Hour. With me, as always, my friend and yours, the goatiest of all F1 goats to have ever goated, the one that they call Mr. Peter D. Windsor. How are you doing,
I'm
good
glad you
sir?
rushed that little bit,
I
Cameron, because, come on. I'm fine,
know.
buddy. I mean, Dexter took me for a very early morning walk this morning, which was nice. And I found this great compilation on Spotify called Chet Baker Coffee Music, Coffee Jazz. It was just perfect for the moment when you're musing over the fact that you can now buy six road cars off the shelf in a showroom that are quicker in a straight line than the Formula One cars were at Silverstone yesterday. that was my morning. It's unbelievable, isn't it? I mean, there's Charles leading the Grand Prix. He's doing 305 kilometers an hour down Hanger Straight. And this is a rhetorical question, by the way, so I'm not going to embarrass you. But do you know what Jim Clark was doing at Spa in 1967 in a Lotus 49?
Go on, Peter.
192 miles an hour.
This is bonkers. What have you,
It's absolutely bonkers. And Nigel was, when I had Nigel on the other day, he was saying he was going to be staying in one of those, I don't know, makeshift hotel things on Hanger Straight, exactly at the point where he took the lead from Nelson in '87. He was going quicker then than anybody went in the Grand Prix yesterday at that point. Can you
what's the
believe it? I mean, what is Formula One? Well, we knew. I mean, I guess they all knew, didn't they? That's why they very few onboards on the world feed, and you didn't hear much onboard audio either. I mean, the engine notes going through turns one, two, and three were just abysmal. Anyway, that was it. That was my
but sure, I
morning.
mean, you say all that, Peter, but surely this is peak F1. Like this is incredible. You saw the Lego race that they had at the start
Yeah,
of
well, exactly. Yeah.
the
You
race,
see, the
and
trouble is, Cameron, when you're in this provocative mood, I can see the twinkle in your eye, and I know that you're just winding me up. I mean, it's just ludicrous. I mean, this whole Lego thing, give me a break. You really do have to wonder sometimes about the mentality of some of the people involved in Formula One at the moment.
And of course, Mohammed Ben Sulayem needed to get involved as the FI president, a
Well, I'm
driver
quite a
parade.
fan, actually. I sort of see him up there with Balest, and I think you can sort of read him a mile away. And I don't care what anybody says about him. He wants to go back to V8s for 2028, so he's got my vote. That's for sure.
Fair, fair, fair. Good shout, Mr. Windsor. As is customary, then,
Mm.
what do you think was the biggest story to come out of the British Grand Prix race weekend?
Well, as Chet was getting into I Get Along Without You Very Well, I was thinking that you'd probably ask that question yet again. And I was thinking of what I might say. And, there's a lot of the technology on display was abysmal, I thought. It was a really, really bad day for technology. Human reaction wise, athletically speaking, I thought it was a great day. There was a lot of stuff out there. I mean, there was Charles' retribution effectively from 2022, but also recent races as well. And not only Lewis can win a race, but also Charles can win a race in a Ferrari. And that was a really nice thing. Lewis had a good day. I'm sure he's a bit annoyed at the end to get beaten by George, but ultimately had a good day and he was there or thereabouts. And if you take Lewis back 6 months, 12 months and given him that British Grand Prix, he would have been pretty happy, I think. Max was the other extreme, total desolation and uh, just total frustration with the car long before the thing went off and took him off into the boonies. And I think that's a milestone moment for Max Verstappen's career. And we may well see him now thinking, right, got to do something different. Let's get into 27 with a different team, probably. But if not, a lot of other things need to change. So there was that. And then there was Kimi, and I still keep coming back to Kimi. And I think possibly the most revealing moment of this entire weekend was the way Kimi reacted when obviously something had broken on the car, when 99% sure he was going to win that race. It was going to be the classic pass with 3 or 4 laps to go to win the British Grand Prix, having dominated the weekend, really. Okay, he didn't qualify sprint qualifying, but he was there or thereabouts, and he made up for it the next day. I mean, he was just in a class of his own. And then something catastrophic like that happens. Catastrophic in the sense of not winning the Grand Prix. And I can think of 10, 12, 15, maybe 19 drivers, 20 that would react in a pretty, you know, unprintable way if something
Mhm.
like that happened to them. And don't forget, it wasn't long ago when we had that sort of hiatus and we were all wondering how this whole business of leading the world championship would rest on the shoulders of this young kid. I think he was 18 at that point, wasn't he? And here's another thing. He was cool, he was calm. His immediate response was something fundamentals happened. I've lost all downforce on the front, whatever it was. Car feels like it's in the air. Straight in, changed the nose, didn't actually fix it. He's still calm and cool. I mean, how many drivers? Can you imagine Max in year 2 in Formula One being that calm and collected in that situation? And Max is very mature now. It's taken him a while to get there. I mean, it was just incredible how I've never seen. We didn't have radios, sadly, back in the day, but yeah, this is how drivers used to react in the 60s because there were so many mechanical failures and things on the car. They just became immune to it. So when 4 laps to go, you run out of fuel or this happens, they have a laugh, and that was what it was. It was the most incredible little cameo of maturity that we're ever going to see in this decade, probably. And I think, and then basically with Bono saying, box the car, you're going to get a penalty anyway, box the car, box the car. No, I want to stay out. I want to stay out. I mean, that was brilliant as well. I mean, so that was yet another layer of this amazing phenomenon we call Kimi Antonelli. And wow, what a performance. So I guess, I guess it was that, if I really think about it. And you could argue that Max coming to some sort of seminal decision about his future as a result of yet another, leaving the track, nothing to do with him, just a passenger, A, and B, the car just being all over the place in terms of power deployment, grip, handling, predictability, everything that, there was nothing there that gave him any sort of platform to be Max Verstappen. So as I say, I think we've got to halfway through 2026. It's pretty clear now what the report cards are for the major teams. And I would say Red Bull are about even with McLaren, about 5 out of 10. For different reasons, McLaren have had a different season, obviously, but disappointing given where they were starting from last year. Very disappointing. And Red Bull, a different thing. They've had to play more of a catch up and doing their own power unit, but nonetheless, so many things that are not right on that car, obviously. And so I'd give them a 5. You'd give Ferrari something like a 7, and then you'd give Mercedes a 9, probably. The reliability, obviously, being the major issue. And so if you're Max now, you're thinking, right, what's Toto's number again? He keeps leaving it. I've seen keep losing it all the time.
Let's go. To that point, Mr. Windsor, I want to
Mm.
double click on this Max Verstappen circumstance because I've said for a while now that my spidey senses tell me that Max being a being who only exists to win F1 races will find himself by hook or by crook in the Silver Arrows at some point in the next couple of years. If not 2027, definitely 2028. Lots of people have said that George Russell has extended his contract. There's no room at the Mercedes in at least next year. Where do you think Max's? What do you think Max's most likely destination is for 2027?
Well, maybe it's because I'm old school, but if I was Toto and there was and Max wanted to drive for me next year, I would just go to the board and say, right, we need to pay George off and get him in another team. And we need to get Max in. We've got to have Max Verstappen, Kimi Antonelli. That's the next 5 years of Mercedes. And let's go. And of course that's doable. And it'd be a lot of money. But George wouldn't, I'm sure, at the end of the day, shy away from that if he was going to go to Red Bull. And if he goes to Red Bull with, I don't know, 400 million, 500 million, is George going to be that upset? Of course he's got a contract, but contracts are meant to be not broken, but contracts are meant to be negotiated, and that's what would happen. And in the context of what Max could do in a Mercedes with Kimi Antonelli, you always have to say that now with Kimi, that's a massive brand investment for Mercedes, and I don't think Toto would have that big a deal selling that to the board. I may be wrong. I say the board, whoever it is that's going to pay the money. I'm assuming a lot of it would come from Germany, but equally, some of it might come from the Middle East as well.
I think this is
I
block.
think how much money the Lewis to Ferrari thing
Oh,
did on Wall Street. It would be the same effect, would it not?
I just think it would
You
be
know,
blockbuster.
And although George may say, I want 90% of that money, nonetheless, when it comes down to hard cash, if they said to George, right, 300 million, number one driver at Red Bull, Hadjar in the other car, he'd probably go for that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think Stefano would give him would contribute to that George Russell fund. I just think it would be humongous for. I always hear Toto talk about, well, I'm not going to protest because it's for the good. It's not for the good, in the best interest of Formula One. This Max and Kimi in the same car, the incumbent and the next generational driver of his era. I just think
Yeah,
it,
I
mate.
mean, the only thing I would say, Cameron, there, the only real glitch there is it's much better for Max to go to Mercedes. Sorry, it's much better for Mercedes if Max goes to Mercedes with Kimi having won the championship this year rather than George winning the championship. I'm not thinking, oh, George is world champion, then's in Red Bull, and Mercedes can't capitalize on him winning the championship, because that's not really an issue. Mercedes will win the manufacturers' championship, and it's more important to get Max in the car than it is to celebrate George as a world champion with the Mercedes logo, I think, in my opinion. I think a much bigger issue is the moral obligation that Toto and the team would feel inevitably towards Kimi in 2027 if he's not world champion and all of a sudden they're putting Max next to him in the other car. It would be much more comfortable for Mercedes if Kimi was world champion, and that was kind of, the slate was then clean and let's move on to the next era. But if Max comes in and starts, just for whatever reason, whether it be luck or circumstance, maybe he's just a little bit quicker, everything adds up, and he wins the championship in 27, that's not going to sit that well with Kimi, is it? Or with Toto, for that matter, who's, probably he's the individual. He's the sort of Ron Dennis in the career of Lewis Hamilton, isn't he? He's the guy, and he would want Kimi to win the championship before he gets Max there, I think. So that's the thing. How do you solve that problem? Well, you solve that problem basically by having an option on this whole deal that we've just been talking about, which is exercisable, I don't know what, you know, end of September, by which point, maybe not, maybe even later. And if it turns out that George is going to be world champion, that's it's one thing. If Kimi's going to be world champion, it's another. They can either stay exactly as they are for a year, or it all happens. That's a possibility as well. But I'm not sure they would talk about any of that stuff or make it public. But to me, that's what is logical based on lots of deals that I've seen happen in Formula One over the years. I know it's different today and contracts are a lot more formalized, but in the sense that Jackie Stewart and Ken Tyrrell never even signed a bit of paper. But at the same time, or indeed Oscar Piastri and Alpine for that matter. Uh, but at the same time, ultimately, I can't see how Mercedes would say no to Max if he said, right, let's do it.
And there are those, Peter, Red Bull fans that think Max Verstappen is loyal to a fault to the team, that he's still going to see out his contract, that he promised Dietrich on his deathbed that he would be there through to 2028. Peter, on the back of the
Well, how
incident
do
that
we
he
know
had,
that, though? Who knows
it's
that?
rumor and
Yeah, rumor,
speculation, of
rumor,
course.
rumor. I mean, it sounds like nonsense to me.
Yeah, potentially. But seeing Max Verstappen in the barrier yet again, the second race consecutively, and hearing him in the car say words to this effect, I'm stuck, mate. Fudge this car. Fudging unbelievable. Fudge this. Have you ever seen or heard Max Verstappen so angry? And how can one come to any other conclusion that other than that Max Verstappen will leave Red Bull as soon as is possible now?
Um, I wouldn't. I mean, the red mist in Barcelona wasn't verbal. It was actionable in terms of what he was doing on the track once they'd made that absurd, ridiculous tire strategy call. The strategy department yet to apologize for that at Red Bull, that is. So that was, that's the same thing, isn't it? It was obviously completely different circumstances. He lost a potential win, for sure podium, but a potential win with that strategy call. And that's why he was so angry. And this occasion, and he started a race car, and this one, it's a different thing. So I suppose there's a parallel there. But to me, even more revealing actually than what he was saying once the thing came to rest and the dust was still in the air was the readout that he was studying in the middle of qualifying between Q1 and Q2 as he's sitting in the car. I don't know how much of this was captured on the world feed, but he's sitting in the car and an engineer gives him a readout, which is a nice little thing, isn't it? That they, forget the computer screens, nothing better than a printout and a bit of handwriting on it for the driver to see what the engineer is talking about. And on the printout, and this is between Q1 and Q2 for qualifying, you can see the traces there, and the upper trace is understeer basically, and then the lower trace is gears, and it's obviously overlain with Hajar. And on one section, by the that an engineer has written, "We need to understand this!" exclamation mark. Now this is between Q1 and Q2 for the British Grand Prix in July 2026, and an engineer is asking Max to try to explain something that's going on. I mean, it's not that he's asking Max, it's just that they are completely lost, like most people in the pit lane, like all of us, and how to run these cars. And that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, how confidence inspiring is it for Max to be looking at a readout where it says, we need to understand this, just before he's about to go into Q2?
That's
And they
incredible.
never did get to understand it anyway, for sure.
No,
So,
no.
and all this stuff about was slow in top speed. Everybody was slow in top speed. It's just that some were even slower than others. Some
Mm.
were doing 305, some were doing 300, some were doing 298. It was just pathetic. It's like, who can go slowest around Silverstone in top speed?
Mm.
And that's what's wrong. I mean, all of this is rubbish. And of course, if they hadn't touched the regulations and all they'd done is gone to a much more user-friendly fuel, which was environmentally sound and interesting, and they had lots of interviews with all the oil company engineers putting these new fuels together, biofuels, the whole thing, and all the emphasis was on that. The public would be saying, Formula One's mega. Look what they're doing for fuel development. Isn't it brilliant? Meantime, the racing's fabulous. We've got 5 drivers within 3 points of the world championship. The cars are rock solid, reliable. If we'd kept the 2014, spec car, well, sorry, if we'd kept the basic cars from 2025, then everything would be normal and we wouldn't be in this situation. But they had to change everything. No, change everything. And they're just putting sticking plasters over it at the moment when you get to a circuit like Silverstone or Spa. Well, don't show this, don't show that, don't have this audio. And the drivers are going around, oh, I'm slow in a straight line. Well, yeah, you are. You're only doing 300 kilometers an hour. Hang on. The fastest guy's only doing 305. So what's
Incredible.
that all about? And what's it all about when they're using different gears everywhere? When Hajar's holding 7th out of Cops and Max is getting 8th. This is identical race cars doing almost identical lap times. And what is that all about?
It's bonkers, Peter.
Well, it
It,
is, it is bonkers, and nobody understands it, least of all the teams, as we know already from that note from the Red Bull engineer. We need to understand this. He's written on the telemetry showing to Max. No wonder Max is, and it will hurt the better you are as a racing driver and the more confidence you have in your own ability to beat the world, the more it hurts you when you can't do anything. It doesn't hurt, you know, Lance Stroll as much as it's hurting Max Verstappen, all this stuff.
yeah, yeah. Peter, I want to ask you just to put a bow on the Max Verstappen circumstance. He gets out the car and in a couple of interviews to Sky Sports and Viaplay, he says words to this effect: that in the first instance he feels, listen, same thing, different cause, same outcome as far as why he was in the barrier, and then he expounds and says that it can happen once, twice, or 3 times even, but when it happens 4 times, this is now dangerous for me, he says. And
Yeah.
then asked by the Viaplay reporter whether he's going to have some very strong words with Red Bull, he says, I don't want anything to do with it for now. It feels like Max isn't at the hatred phase. He's now gone past there, and this is
Yeah, yeah.
almost an indifference and apathy. He just wants rid, doesn't he? He's
Oh, yeah,
had enough.
absolutely. I mean, I was back end of 1980. I went to this really grotty office on the flyover coming out of Hammersmith on the way to Heathrow, which was the office of a company called Charles Stewart, which actually was the UK head office for the Marlborough World Championship team run by John Hogan. And I went in there with Carlos Reutemann to sign his new deal for 81. And Alan Prost was in there with John. And John said, "Oh, come in." He had a bit of a stutter. I shouldn't do that. Come in. So Carlos sat down. Alan was there. And everybody's having a laugh. And that's what it was like in those days. And John said, "Alan, tell Carlos what you were just saying." And Alan said, "Oh, I've just told Jean that if McLaren will not release me, I will never drive the car again, because I've had 4 accidents now, all of them failures, all of them not my fault. And if I'm not released to go to Renault, I will not drive at all." And when Max got out of the car, that's exactly what I was thinking about, was that 1980 season of Alan Prost at McLaren, when he drove the heart out of that car. He was unbelievably quick, and the front wishbones kept breaking and the uprights kept breaking and all sorts of things went wrong. And as young as he was, Prost said, "No way I'm going to drive that car anymore. It's dangerous. I'll get killed driving that car." And John said, "Yeah, no problem. I'll release you, and we'll set it up. We'll get you go to Renault, wear the Marlborough thing." And John put the whole thing together, and that was fine. But and I understand, therefore, completely where Max is coming from. You know, if you're a passenger, that's the problem. You know, when you're a passenger and you have like an aero problem in Austria, which in itself is a function of hitting a curb the wrong way, probably, which is a function of the way the car is anyway when you're driving it on the limit. And then you've got this absurd thing. I mean, this is the other point, Cam. We haven't spoken about it in a long time. And I don't know how many other journalists, apart from you and I, were talking about the dangers of the DRS, the new DRS system. I think probably we were not many people agreeing with us, because everybody just wanted to go along with the new thing. And isn't it mega? And I kept saying, you know, remember Marcus Ericsson at Monza, remember Jack Doohan at Suzuka. This is not a good thing. There's more things to go wrong on the car. It's more complicated. And guess what? They've made it even more complicated now with the rear wing system they have on the Ferrari and the Red Bull and maybe another car or two. And no wonder it's causing trouble, as predicted. And I can remember talking to one of, I won't drop him in it, but I remember talking to one of the Formula One aerodynamicists who was forming that regulation at the time. We were all saying this is not the way to go for Formula One. And he said, "Oh, no, no, no. If it'll go the other way, it'll be bulletproof now, because everybody's got so much experience, and that's why we're ready to do it. And everybody's so confident, blah, 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 blah." Look what's happened, you know? And you could say, well, it's not happening in other teams. It's Red Bull. Yeah, it's Red Bull, because they've got about 28 balls in the air. They got a new engine. They got this, they got that. They got a car that's quick one day, slow the next. They've got the best ICE engine in Formula One, probably the worst battery engine in Formula One. You know, they've got deployment that's all over the place. They don't know what they're doing. The engineers saying we need to understand this in the middle of qualifying. You know, it's a complete mess. And it's not, ultimately, it's not Red Bull's fault, because the regulations are, it's the problem is the regulations. But if other teams have adapted in the way, say, Mercedes have, then, you know, that's part of the battle.
Yeah.
And that's this DRS thing, I think, was a massive mistake from day one. And they should have used the opportunity for these new regs to say, right, well, at least we'll get rid of DRS now. We don't need it. We got the power thing. But they were still, guess what? They were paranoid about top speed. Well, it hasn't solved that problem, has it? 300 kilometers an hour on the Hangar Straight at Silverstone. I mean, it's just pathetic how they've got it so wrong, really.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there were drivers that tried to warn them, mention their names. Max Verstappen, George Russell said in the simulator a couple of years ago that I don't know how this formula is going to look. Carlos Sainz says, "I don't think F1 should look or feel like this." And yeah, and still here we are. Peter, going forward, do you think that 58-42 is a big enough change
No,
for next year?
I don't. I've got a T-shirt out of my new merch store saying 60-40 is not enough. Make corners great again. And it's selling well. And it's not enough. You know, we should be going to make 80-20 max.
Yeah.
Of course it's not enough. And that's for 28. You know, next year you barely notice the difference at all. It's nothing like enough. And it's, oh, you know, we can't upset Audi, we can't upset Cadillac or whatever it is. I don't know. It's just, it's so sad, actually. It's so sad. It's so sad when you think about Jim Clark doing 192 miles an hour, whatever it was, over 190 at Spa in 1967. I repeat that, 1967. He's doing over 190. And I'd be willing to bet that when they got to somewhere like Tripoli, the auto unions and the Mercs probably weren't far away from that speed either. Probably going quicker than the Merc today.
Insane progress, Peter. Linear.
Well, exactly. It's actually downward progress, isn't it?
Yeah, we've regressed. Talk about qualifying. To that point, talk about qualifying in the way that you felt, because I that were you described it very succinctly, Peter. It's the that when you hear the engines or the ICEs go burr burr burr. How sad does that make you feel inside? Like if
Well, it
this
just
is
reminds me of
out,
James Hunt. It reminds me of James Hunt when I was chatting to him at Monaco one year. We were talking about how he drives and the way to drive, just the art of driving well. And I remember him saying, "Oh, my grandmother could drive from apex to exit with opposite lock. I mean, there's no magic in that. It's all about the entry to the corner." And the fact that James immediately spoke about his grandmother was always makes me think now of grandmothers driving the cars through turns 1, 2, and 3 at Silverstone in 2026, because they're just on rails. They're doing what, 100 and I don't know, 120 miles an hour or something there, something pathetic. 200 and whatever it is, 210, 220. Yeah, they go. Turn one used to be the new turn one used to be quite a good corner. And now they go, and it is still quite a good corner, but it's
what is going on?
3 hours later they get to the straight, and it's the same on Hanger Straight. It's the same on the Wellington Straight. What can you say? I thought it was absolutely appalling. The other thing about qualifying, which wasn't talked about very much, I don't think, was how Pierre Gasly managed to get a 3-place grid penalty for impeding Lance Stroll's Aston Martin, which in itself is quite a feat. I mean, even if Pierre's going slowly, he's still going to be quicker than Stroll in an Aston Martin, isn't he? Anyway, I mean, if you're impeding Kimi Antonelli or something, or Max, fair enough. But impeding Lance Stroll is not a great bit of your CV. Anyway, putting that to one side, I'm only joking, obviously. Putting that to one side, you know why he impeded him, Cameron? Did you get to the bottom of that?
No, go on.
Okay, his radio wasn't working.
Oh wow!
And here, get this. FOM, this is in the steward's decision. FOM conceded that the problem was with them and not with the team.
But still gifted a
Monaco speed loop pit lane dramas again. F1 has a problem with its radios on the Gasly car. They admit it's an F1 problem, not an Alpine problem. And Gasly gets the 3-place grid penalty. What do you think about that? And they said, the steward said, oh, well, even if you don't have the radio, you should be able to tell what's going on.
Ugh.
And they're right in a way. It's just that it's a wake-up call for everybody, isn't it? Because the race engineer's job in qualifying and practice is to go, it's constant air traffic control of where you are, of the car in front, car behind, how many seconds, this and that. They very, very rarely talk about anything other than just that rubbish. And because of that, the drivers get lulled into being a passenger within the envelope of air traffic control, which in a way is correct. You got to trust the engineer and what he's saying. But nobody seems to think about what happens when it goes down. And what happens to blue flags? What happens to generally looking in your mirrors as much as you possibly can? They probably can't see much in the mirrors. It brings back the same old story again. And if it can happen to Gasly, it can happen in the dying minutes of qualifying when there's a pole lap at stake and the world championship at stake, and somebody's radio goes down and somebody in the running for the world championship gets a 3-place grid penalty. What's the world going to do when that happens? And if it can happen once at Silverstone, it can happen again. And it was an F1 problem, just to repeat the point, not an Alpine team problem. That was one of the most significant things of qualifying, in my opinion.
Wow. Gold star for F1/FIA, as always, Peter. And expounding on that point very quickly, what did you make of the safety car finish? And again,
they always sadden me, those safety car finishes, not because I don't like seeing them, but because that's what we should have had in Abu Dhabi 21. And every time we have one of those safety car finishes, I just think of what it would have been like at Abu Dhabi 21 if when when whoever it was, I guess it was Jonathan Wheatley, but it might have been somebody else, said to Michael Massey, "We can't have a safety car finish. We got to finish as a proper race, even if it's one lap. It's got to be a race. It's got to be a race. You can't decide the world championship with a safety car finish." And Michael Massey, instead of saying, "Well, I'm not going to breach the regulations. Inevitably, it will be a safety car finish because the lap cars have to unlap themselves. Go away, shut up, and get on with it." He didn't do that. He said, "Oh yeah, you're right. Bernie would probably want to have this. Yeah, yeah, okay," or whatever he thought. And they released the cars and well, didn't release the cars, and Max won the championship. And so it always makes me think of what we missed that day, that night, because what we would have missed would have been Lewis driving around behind the safety car, waving to the crowd, fireworks going off, and probably everyone at the track in tears at this man who's just broken Michael's record and won his 8th world championship, justifiably so, given the way the season had gone. I'm not saying Max didn't deserve a championship either in 21. I'm just saying that it wasn't as if he lucked into it. And that's what should have happened. And every time we have a safety car finish now, I always think it's not a bad thing, a safety car finish. The Silverstone crowd loved it.
Did
And
they, Peter?
it didn't hurt the day at all, in my opinion. I think it was a
Oh,
great day.
I've heard evidence to the contrary that there were lots of people who wanted to get a grandstand finish,
Of
and
course
then
they
it
did.
crescendoed.
Of
Yeah, it
course they, of
crescendoed
course,
beautifully.
sorry, let me rephrase that. Of course, everybody would love to have seen
Mm.
Lewis passing George and, Charles getting a puncture or something, or whatever on the last lap and Lewis winning the Grand Prix. But what I'm saying is the safety car finish wasn't terrible. It was a great moment. It was a great moment to celebrate Charles Leclerc's return and the battle that he's now won with himself to drive these new cars as well as he is now. It was a great moment actually to celebrate Lewis and what he's done this year, and to see them driving around slowly like that. It wasn't a terrible moment. This whole cliche about we've got to finish with a race lap, I think, is pathetic, to be honest. And we saw the lie of that in Abu Dhabi 21, and Silverstone was okay. Silverstone
Y-
was okay. I mean, there were a lot of things that the fans probably didn't like about Silverstone, and I would suspect some of it would be the backing off on the straights. But no, if it, there's no way you ever compromise safety, and even if they're making a mistake, if the race director says keep the safety car out for another lap, you have to accept that, because he's not doing it because he wants to, just annoy the crowd. He's doing it for some safety reason. Something's not perfect at some moment on some part of the lap. Simple as that.
Whilst I agree with you, Peter, and you're on the money as per usual, I think that final lap is testament to F1 becoming WWF1. This is Liam Parker, the Chief Communications Officer, saying now that F1 is not sport, it is content. So if you manage our expectation that way as F1 fans, then you can forgive F1 fans, both new and old around the world, for being a little bit despondent when we don't get the sexy grandstand fireworks final lap finish, that because you've conditioned us for that. F1, we've grown to anticipate that. It is the Netflix Drive to Survive era, of course. No longer is it the early 90s
Yeah,
or the
well, you're
60s or
probably asking
70s.
the wrong guy then, because to me, just having a one lap sprint is too contrived. It's too
I
coincidental. It's too contrived. It's too ridiculous, and it's juvenile apart from anything else. You don't,
no, I
you
agree with
because it looks like, well, that's a bit weird, isn't it? How they managed to get it just perfect for one lap. Yeah, safety is safety, and you don't ever worry about how many laps there are to go. You just worry about, is the track safe to race on, and that's it. End of story.
you. Yeah, yeah. They're doing now what they should
And
have
I
done.
think Lewis was. I think Lewis was a bit upset afterwards with the call to bring him in, but
Oh,
I think they made exactly the right call based on wanting to have both drivers basically on the same tires and not go through all the dramas they've had before at Silverstone, notably 2022 when they left Charles out to dry, obviously. So having them both on softs was a good thing. At the time, it seemed pretty likely there'd be 1 or 2 laps to go, and you'd want to be on the soft, not on old mediums, old hards actually. And if it had gone the other way and they'd left him out and he hadn't been able to pass George, he would have said, "Why don't you bring me in?" You know.
Surely, Peter. And again, Lewis has been brilliant, right? He's remembering who he is. So for me to be critical of him is almost disingenuous. But
Mm.
I said this at Monaco, and I'm going to repeat the sentiment at Silverstone. Sometimes doesn't a driver like George did, who was like, mate, track position is key here, and who knows how long this safety car is going to go for. Sometimes doesn't Lewis want to just overtype, just exercise a veto and say, you know what are you not talking about? This is a safety car circumstance. I could get a cheeky P2 here if it goes on for as long as I think it might, and just completely unplug the radio and just go about his own business. Has Lewis got some corn to hold there, or is he being a good corporate citizen by just abiding the instructions of Santi and Scuderia Ferrari?
Uh, I mean, he's gelled pretty well with his side of the garage and his new engineer and all that stuff. So that's, I don't think he wants to go too far away from what they're basically suggesting he does. And in order to have concluded that it was worth taking the risk to disobey team orders and stay out, he would have to have known that George had his puncture 8 laps into his hard tyre stint and had come in and was on old mediums for that time. And to get all that sort of information to Lewis in the middle of the race, not easy, bearing in mind the level of communication they have. And I was listening quite a lot to Lewis yesterday, and on 3 occasions, his engineer said to Lewis, tire update," and there was just radio silence, nothing.
Hmm.
And then there was during the very brief VSC when an umbrella, I think, blew into the sand trap. Can only happen in England. Usually the rain causing it, but not on
Yeah.
this occasion. And at that point, Lewis said, terrible understeer, car won't turn." And a few laps later, then they say, "Right, box, new tires." And he says, the tires are perfect. And then still boxes. I mean, when you've got communication going on like that, and at the same time, you've got the Ferrari not telling him that he's got a 5-second penalty for the jump start until he gets to the pit box. What was that all about? I mean, this is how fragile, obviously, the communication with Lewis is these days. What to say to him, what not to say to him, what to get the best from him. You know, Freddie may be saying, "Oh, back in the Formula 3 days, if he got a penalty, we never told him because he always drove better," or whatever they're thinking. You know, to me, as I said in the video last night, you know, the drivers I work with, all of them want as much information as they can have, providing you give it to them the right way. In other words, at the right point of the track or whatever, on a pit, whatever it was in those days. But, you know, if Lewis has got a 5-second penalty, I can't think of an argument of why it wouldn't be good to let him know that as soon as possible, because then in his own mind, he can start to think about how he wants to drive the race. Now, they may think, oh, if we tell Lewis that, he's going to start talking on the radio for 5 minutes about how he didn't deserve the penalty and he's going to lose concentration and not be very quick. Well, that doesn't give you, that's not much confidence in your driver, is it? And you talk that through with him before he gets in the race car anyway, you know, what sort of thing. Maybe they have talked it through. Maybe Lewis said, oh, if I ever get a penalty, I don't want to hear about it. Maybe he said that. I'd be surprised, but maybe he has. But anyway, the point I'm making is I don't think the communication between Lewis and his engineer, I think as good a job as they're doing together, I don't think the communication is such that Lewis is in a position really to make calls against their recommendation based on gut feel. Because what is his gut feel if he doesn't have enough information about what everybody else is doing anyway? I'm sorry to be slightly complicated in your answer, but I think you understand where I'm coming from.
Hmm. It is a bit complicated over there. I'd argue that potentially Ferrari want to put all of their eggs in the Lewis Hamilton basket if they harbour aspirations of winning a championship. And then we get to Silverstone, a track around which Lewis Hamilton has always been like fantastic. And Charles Leclerc apparently remembers who he is. He stops trying to look at Lewis Hamilton's telemetry and invests in his own driving style, doesn't want to mimic how aggressive Lewis has been on the brakes of late, and starts remembering who Charles Leclerc is. Uh, If you had to pick a driver, Peter, between Lewis and Charles, who's going to score, who's going to finish highest on the driver standings in 2026, who have you got?
Well, you have asked me that question before, Cameron. You phrased it slightly differently. But my response is always the same. If Ferrari have a car capable of winning the world championship, and I've said this from the start of the year, even when Charles was in trouble, I think that driver will be Charles. I think over a season, he will outpoint Lewis Hamilton. Now, you began your question to me by saying it looked like, the best thing for Ferrari would be to favor, I think I actually used the word favor, I think it was Lewis. Well, I think I think the premise there is wrong, because I don't think any team favors a driver in the way that a lot of the media and the ecosystem wants a driver to be favored. It doesn't happen. And lots of drivers who aren't going well, who are not winning, like to persuade through hidden persuasion the ecosystem that it is happening, but it isn't happening. There isn't a moment at Ferrari, in my opinion, when they would have been saying, Lewis, he's won Spain now. We're really going to focus on Lewis now. The implication being we're not going to focus on Charles anymore. I mean, that just doesn't happen. You have Charles Leclerc, who's quite capable of winning Grand Prix and the World Championship. You got Lewis Hamilton, who's quite capable of winning Grand Prix and the World Championship. And if you've got a World Championship winning car, they're both going to be in good shape. And that's it. And you just work flat out in the way you've got your organogram set up for the team. So there is none of that favoring stuff. In terms of Silverstone, I mean, for me, the Charles rebirth did begin in uh, Barcelona in the race. I think he found a rhythm in the race when you've just by definition got to get out there and make the car work. And he had a few iffy moments, but in the race he got into a reasonable rhythm, and he wasn't that slow relative to Lewis. He was doing quite a good job. Then he got to Austria, which I always predicted would be a complicated, difficult race for Charles, because it's a street fighting silly circuit, which is basically a square with not many proper corners, and it does require incredible accuracy in terms of high speed braking and the way you hit curbs, all the things that Charles was finding difficult with the deployment management that he was trying to get on top of. But in the race, again, he had a little bit of a rhythm, wasn't too bad. But by then, obviously, we know he'd switched to the carbon industry, brake friction materials. And we came to Silverstone, and he did a very good job of mixing and matching, mixing Lewis's, and I would I wouldn't agree with your adjective of aggressive braking. All Lewis is doing is braking more in a straight line than Charles Leclerc. And because he's braking more in a straight line, he's able more efficiently to harvest the energy that he needs through the rear axle. And he can then deploy it more efficiently around the lap, wherever it requires braking, heavy braking. And he's doing a very good job with that. And what Charles needed to do was exactly that, but then still retain some of the things that he, Charles Leclerc, have always done a little bit better than Lewis Hamilton, in his opinion. And that obviously manifested itself for many years in his ability to create short corners like Max Verstappen, to shorten the corner, lengthen the straight in, lengthen the straight out. But in this situation, when he wasn't able to do that because it was going to hurt the way he harvested the power, the only thing he could do is drive like Lewis, but do it a little bit softer and a little bit lighter, and just be a little bit better with these transitions when he does start to turn in. And that's exactly what he did at Silverstone. He worked it out. And what we saw at Silverstone was a new Charles Leclerc. He's not turning in particularly early, but he's doing everything Lewis does, but a little bit more fine touch. Whereas Lewis these days is just leaning on the rear a little bit more than he used to, in my opinion, when he used to really turn in early. And everything's, if you look at, there are quite a lot of shots we saw on TV and still shots you see of Lewis. He's got almost sort of neutral drift going into some of the slower corners. He's leaning on the rear quite a lot, where Charles was never leaning on the rear at Silverstone. And that was the difference. And when they got to the really fast Beckett section, Charles was just like dancing like that. And Lewis was always, there's a little bit more load going through the car. And that was the difference. And Charles has done exactly what I think. He just complicated it. And I think he still is complicating it by going to the carbon industry friction material. I think he should go back to Brembo. And I think you'll find he'll be just as quick now as he was before. Probably quicker because he'll have a better feel for the brake pedal that he's known and loved for so many years. I think
It's
he just put too many things together after Monaco.
Peter, it's very interesting. Had you asked me at the start of the year whether Lewis was going to beat Charles around Austria and then Charles beat Lewis around Silverstone, I would have asked you what
Mm.
you were smoking. It just it
Yeah,
sounds incredible. But again, it
yeah.
is that type of topsy turvy season, isn't it? I would have been keen to see how Lewis would have performed, but for the cheeky oversteer moments at Luffield in qualifying, had he put it on P1, would he have gone and made that mistake off the line? Would he have? It's interesting when Lewis gets a sniff. He's a
Well, what
different.
was that mistake? It was an interesting mistake, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Because you do see the thing move slightly. But interestingly, most drivers in the past who have made a mistake like that, let's say he's released the clutch just a fraction, or maybe released the brake pedal just a fraction, usually they then overreact and brake more or go back with the clutch, and then they make a terrible start. But Lewis actually makes a great start
Mm, mm.
despite that, with unbelievable reflexes. And maybe even from his point of view, he didn't actually feel it. I'm sure he did, but it was very, very slight, wasn't it?
It was slight. It was
But the problem
slight.
is photographic evidence is a lot
Yeah,
more
they don't.
reliable than F1 timing loops these days. So,
Which is interesting, Peter, because I
mm,
remember a couple of years ago when Lando Norris and Checo Perez made full starts, the transponders weren't working, and then they did one of these, didn't they? And no harm, no foul. Didn't see it then, which is interesting. But again,
yeah.
the FIA being, I mean, it's Hanlon's razor. Is it never chalk up that which you can point at malice, um,
Mm.
or never chalk up to malice that which you can attribute to stupidity. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me introduce you to my friend,
Well
the
said.
FIA.
Well
Let,
said.
let me pick your brain on Kimi Antonelli and
Yeah.
George, Peter, as we round third.
Hmm.
Um, I feel like George got away with something there and that potentially he needs to go away from this race and have a word with himself. It felt like Kimi Antonelli was as near as makes no difference. Perfect all race weekend. Like it was quick when he needed to be. He started closing the gap to Charles Leclerc in the second. Like it was almost it felt like a proper championship drive from Kimi Antonelli. I don't want to jump on the bandwagon, but he by dint of the evidence of Silverstone, he almost leaves me with no option. Do you think George? What does George Russell need to do now, Peter, to address this ostensible pace deficit? He said after the race that if I stand a chance of competing for a championship, then the team need to do better. That I can't be losing this much pace in a straight line. It's almost like he was looking for other people to blame other than himself. Does George need to go away and have a very long look in the mirror now because of the pace deficit to Kimi?
Well, I think he does, yes, in answer to that. And I think if he thinks it's down to top speed, then he needs to get a life and face reality. I mean, he's had two wins now, both of them, sorry, he's had a win and a P2, both of them pretty spurious. If you look at the circumstances of Austria, which we've talked about at length, and now this P2, he's very lucky. I mean, Lewis would have had him easily if they had had another lap of racing. And yeah, what can I say? His top speed was, it's the wrong word, isn't it? The slow speed, the slowest speed he was doing on the straight was a couple of kilometers away from Kimi, but that's not where he lost the time. He was losing the time everywhere. And he's, and he's been doing that for a while now. And I think he always felt, oh, I'll have Kimi when we get. I remember after Miami, and when we get to the real circuits, I'll have him. Don't worry, I'm never very good at Miami. And I remember saying to you at the time, that's fatal words from George Russell because you're supposed to be good everywhere, and you should be good everywhere. And the minute you start saying, I like this circuit, I like that circuit, is when those circuits you like come back to bite you. And it's exactly what happened because that meant he was basically not going to do anything and just wait for the next circuits to come along, and he was going to win them. And that's not happening for him. And it's quite clear, uh, you know, Kimi has the car squarer on the road. He's got a softer touch. He can turn in earlier than George and save track length. He can lengthen the straights. He's got the car straighter sooner. He's better on tire management. It's difficult to think of a single area now where George is better than Kimi. I can't think of any, to be honest. There's a couple where he's as good, but better than Kimi. I wouldn't have said he's a better racer than Kimi now. Kimi's as good, if not better, on fast corners. He's better on change of direction for sure. Doesn't load the car as much. That's why he was doing so well out of, is it Luffield, where they go through that long left and then into the horseshoe right? That section, that's where Kimi was so good. He wasn't loading the car. That's what caught George out. Yeah, it was at Q1, I think. He goes in. He's so wide on his approach into that left-hander that by the time he's through there and he's on the power early, but then he's got load in the car and he's trying to get it straight for the next right and locks up. He's surprised that it locks up, even though he's braking with massive load weight transfer going on in the car. And he said, I've never locked up there once in my life, in my career. Well, yeah, that's fine. But you've probably never been pushed as hard by a teammate through that left-hander before. And you've probably never gone in as wide and as quick as that with so much load going through. That's the problem. And he can't see that, obviously. And the engineers can't see that. And so therefore, he's going around in circles, not very quickly. That's the problem. And Spa, yeah, Spa, he'll be pretty good at Spa, won't he? I mean, he'll be... Eau Rouge is Eau Rouge. It's pretty line locked. Straight. They'll be similar, I suspect. Top of the hill. That next section of road, I think Kimi will be very good there through Les Combes down into the horseshoe right-hander where the car always understeers, and Kimi will be very good at shortening the corner there and generally managing the tires. That next left-hander, pretty much the same. And then Pouin. George will be quick at Pouin, but I don't think Kimi will be any slower than George through Pouin. And I think he'll be better through Stabilo, through the change of direction Stabilo. And then coming out of there, that long run up the hill, he'll probably be better there. As a result of which, George will probably say he's got less top speed. And then they'll break into the chicane. And Kimi will be fine there. He's very good there. High speed braking, slow speed change of direction, brilliant. And then the hairpin, La Source. Doesn't really, I mean, it's not that difficult a corner, isn't it? You can be offline there and still be very quick. So, yeah, there's no way George is going to blow Kimi away around Spa. It'll be about 3 areas, key areas, where Kimi will be extremely good. And if George is going to beat him over a race distance or qualifying lap, he's going to have to be at least as good as Kimi there.
Oof, this feels really it feels of the moment or of moments, Peter. It feels really important now that again I thought that George would see to Kimi handily around the long sweeping turns and high speed Maggots and Beckett's and Chapel of Silverstone. I just thought there was no way. And then again, Kimi Antonelli proves that he's not just a short, not just a low minimum speed merchant, that he's carrying much more speed through Maggots and Beckett's than even George Russell. Is that, and looking at the line, you always speak to the lines more beautifully than I could, Peter, but it seems like even through high speed turns, Kimi Antonelli's less of a geometric racing line merchant than George. So what is he doing?
He's doing what Max does. All he is, he's just feeling the surface of the road, and he's trying to get the car in he's trying to shorten the corners as much as possible, so that the car's traveling in a straight line as much as possible. But he's very, very good at matching his rates of input with exactly the energy that's going through the car, and it's a completely natural thing that you don't think about. And that is the key. This is the absolute heart of the matter of driving a racing car, is that your rates of input into the steering, the throttle, the brakes, and in the old days, the clutch, perfectly have to match all the dynamic weights moving around the car at any given moment. And the dynamic weights are hundreds of thousands in different directions. Think of a billiard table. Think of you and 3 of your mates lifting a billiard table 3 inches off the ground. You've got all the balls in the middle of the billiard table. And then you have to make sure that none of the balls ever touch the rim. And you'll have to keep moving the table to try and stop, all 4 of you. That is what it's like. That's the nearest description I can have of managing the dynamic weights of a racing car. And if your rates of input, if you violently lift one corner and everybody else is doing it very softly, what's going to happen? All the balls are going to go to one side of the table, are they not? But if everybody's rates of input in the way they're moving the table are perfect and they're all identical, the balls have half a chance of staying in the middle. That's what it's all about. And George does have moments, and he's spiky. I've often described him as spiky, even in the Lewis, long before the Lewis days. He's a spiky driver. When he makes some of his inputs are like that, and it moves the ball. And that's exactly what happened when he went off. He went through that left-hander, and then it was all quite spiky because he had a lot of load in the car, and he was then trying to get it back the other way, and it was a spiky movement. Whereas if Kimi had done that, everything would have been slightly more gentle. And it's just, that's exactly what Charles has found now. He's found that sweet spot again of being able to keep the billiard table three inches off the ground and keep the balls away from the edge. And he's doing that with a beautifully light touch, even though from his point of view, it sucks because he's still making the corners a bit longer than he really wants to. But he realizes how important that is from an energy harvesting point of view. So he just has to live with that. That's what's going on. And I'd say the other thing about Kimi is that, and it's another layer, yet another layer to his brilliance, is how he's got on top of the deployment and the harvesting. You know, is it any, I don't know, is there any explanation why George was getting 8th on the Wellington Straight and Kimi was keeping in 7th
I have
in
no clue,
qualifying?
Peter.
You know, why? What was Kimi doing there that George wasn't?
It's
You know,
it's
maybe that's significant, maybe it's not. I just don't understand these regulations enough to be able to say, wow, Kimi really got it right there. He's just harvesting even more energy. Because if it was that simple, George would be doing the same, wouldn't he? There has to be something else there. And I don't know what that is. And maybe what gear you're in actually is not very important at all these days. Bearing in mind, Mercedes were in 7th the whole time going down the straight, hangar straight. You know, then might as well not have 8th gear in the car. And so, but what does that mean? I don't understand what that means. You know, when McLaren with the same engine, you got 8th gear. I know their ratios are different, but around Silverstone, you'd imagine everybody being 8th, wouldn't you?
I don't get it. I suppose this is the question that I'm asking you, Peter. It's hard to discern whether it's the algorithm or whether it's Kimi Antonelli just being a genius, because in qualifying, Antonelli was 219 kilometers per hour through Beckett's as versus Leclerc, who was 210, Lewis 207, George 211. I'm like, is that the
But what
algorithm
do you mean
or
by
is
through
that?
Beckett? So what part of Beckett's?
Oh yeah, it's a good shout. Well, yeah, yeah. I don't know. I'm
Because some,
presuming.
I mean, there was, if you're looking at a point where maybe they're just coming out of the power and downshifting from 6th to 5th, that may make them quicker 30 meters further on. So it's kind of difficult to just look at one speed and call it
Say that they're
Beckett's.
they're
You know,
quickest. Yeah.
I don't want to
Yeah.
put a damn screw. I don't imagine the differences were that much actually between any of them, but there's no doubt Kimi was very, very good through there. There was, I don't see any way anyone would have been quicker than Kimi in that car through there. Given all the deployment rubbish and everything else that you need these days, I think he was absolutely on the limit of that car without looking as if he's on the
Mm.
limit, and indeed hardly sweating because he's driving with all the perfect rates of input. And we should never value the or underestimate the amount of talent it takes to have perfect rates of input. It's something that some drivers don't even know about because they've never had it. They just do what they do in the sim and they can correct a slide here and they hold it there and they've got good reflexes, good balance. They love the feeling of opposite lock. They know how to get rid of understeer. They do all the things that racing drivers do. You see hundreds of them in Formula 2 and Formula 3, but very, very few have that innate ability perfectly to match their rates of input. And that is not something that would ever show up on a sim because we're talking microscopically small detail at a
It's the
very, very fast rate.
it's the automotive equivalent of perfect pitch, isn't it, Peter? It's just I
Yeah,
think it
yeah,
can.
yeah. When you say that, reminds me of John Watson in the era of hi-fi, the era of digital music. John Watson refusing to get rid of his vinyl and his diamond needle because the sound was so much to his ear and his musical driver. The sound was so much better, and he's
Hmm.
right. And it's like as Rob Wilson has always said, the problem with the way I just described most Formula 3, Formula 2 drivers driving is that they're doing everything to a digital platform. But what Kimi's doing is between the digits. That's why the engineers and George Russell can't see what he's doing.
And a follow. For Mr. Windsor, I've been Cameron CC. Until next time, remember to look, but never stare.